Hello everyone, if you're new to my channel, consider liking and subscribing. It will make me feel wonderful if you do that. Thanks. By the way, I also have another Naruto and Luffy fanfiction channel. If you are interested, link is in the description.
For Better or for Worse by Syluk. The Pirate King Monkey D. Luffy didn't come back to save the world. His only wish is to save his friends and assure their absolute happiness this time around, even if he has to turn said world upside down while trying to achieve that, for better or for worse. Adios.
Luffy jerked from his sleep, his breathing rapid and erratic. He quickly swept the room with his eyes, at the same time checking the surroundings with observation haki, searching for an immediate threat. There was none. Luffy heaved a heavy sigh and brushed a hand over his sweaty face, trying to get rid of images from the nightmare, stubbornly clinging to his mind. The boy slid from under his blanket, picked up his straw hat and quietly walked to the other two lying forms in the room. Law and Beppo were peacefully sleeping on their respective futons, safe and well. Luffy smiled softly at them, then carefully opened the door and slipped to the corridor. He made his way through the house to the room where Ace was sleeping and sneaked in. Luffy stood at the foot of Ace's bed, simply observing the calm and steady movement of his older brother's chest. After a while, the last remnants of this night's nightmare finally retreated into the darkness of his psyche. The rubber boy put his hat on and grinned. Then he left the room and walked out of the house to check on the last person he came to care about dearly. Corazon was sitting on the ground, leaning against the old tree stump at the edge of the clearing in front of the Dayton's hut. There was a lit cigarette between his lips like usual, and in one hand he held a bottle of sake, sipping from it from time to time. The blonde was bareheaded, wrapped in his black feathered coat, shielding him from the coldness of the night. "What are you doing here, Corazon?" Corazon got startled by an unexpected voice. He turned to the side and saw Luffy, who had his head tilted in curiosity. "I'm stargazing," he replied, smiling sheepishly. Luffy looked up at the sky. "See anything interesting?" "I do, actually." Corazon also lifted his eyes up. "The second brother constellation. You can't see it in the north blue, but here it's right there." He pointed his finger at the specific spot in the sky, but Luffy frowned confused as he followed the direction and saw only stars. "Where is the first brother?" the boy asked. Corazon chuckled. "There is a small chain of islands in the north blue called the First Brothers Archipelago." A contemplative expression settled on his features. "Ironic, isn't it?" The blonde paused, taking a gulp from his bottle. "They say two brothers lived a long time ago. The first brother, the older one, caught an incurable heart disease and was doomed to die, but the younger one ripped his own heart out and gave it to his brother. The gods were deeply moved by his sacrifice and bestowed a divine gift upon his soul, allowing him to enter the sky and become a star constellation." Luffy stared at the man with wide eyes full of eagerness. "What happened to the first brother? Did he survive?" "He did," Corazon answered. He was silent for a moment. Before continuing, he became a ruler of his kingdom. A tyrant who robbed from his own people and killed anyone daring to speak against him. The same gods got furious at him for wasting the sacrifice of his younger sibling, and sank his kingdom into the sea, creating the First Brothers Archipelago. What a jerk." Luffy screwed his face in disdain but then smiled brightly. "I like the second brother." Corazon couldn't help but let out a genuine laughter as it welled up inside his chest. "But maybe it was the heart of his sibling what made the first brother do what he did," he said thoughtfully, once he calmed down. A light frown suddenly marred Luffy's face. "You're not responsible for Mingo's actions," he said in a serious tone. Corazon spit out a gulp of his booze he'd just taken and just gawked at the kid with his mouth slightly open from shock, unable to catch any palpable thought buzzing in his head. Luffy took his straw hat off, climbed on the man's lap and put it onto his head. Then the boy snuggled into his chest, pressing his ear at the place where Corazon's heart was. "I can hear your heart. You haven't given it away," he stated. "Stop blaming yourself and thinking that you could have changed anything. What's done is done. Don't live in the past, so that you wouldn't lose the sight of your future." Luffy made a pause, before adding, "Unless you'll be the only one left alive, but I'm here to make sure that it won't happen." That Corazon was stunned was an understatement. He knew that the kid sometimes got serious and blurted out things beyond his age wisdom, but this was something else. It even felt like Luffy was talking from experience, as stupid as it sounded. If he really ended up completely alone at some point in his short life, there was no wonder why he was so inclined towards physical contact. With every touch and hug, the boy just wanted to assure himself that there was someone next to him. Corazon smiled gently at Luffy. He covered him with the sleeve of his coat, keeping him in place because the boy didn't give any sign of wanting to move. Luffy snuggled even closer, muttering, "So warm," under his breath as he dozed off. The blonde glanced up at the second brother constellation again and took a good swig of sake. "Not responsible, huh?" he said out loud with a small smile gracing his lips. Luffy slightly stirred. "Meat," he mumbled in his sleep, "hat." Corazon chuckled, reaching for the straw hat and putting it back on its rightful owner's head. Yeah, the future was definitely so much more interesting than the past. Luffy got bored chasing Ace to the forest after a week. It wasn't like he gave up on befriending his older brother once again. Ace needed patience and time, but there was no way that Luffy could have waited for 3 months or longer till the stubborn idiot would start to accept him, if at all. Last time, a fortunate turn of events led them to finally becoming brothers. This time, Luffy got here earlier. It was different. It's not like he would have repeated the same stuff with Blue Jam anyways. So, Luffy resolved to start with Sabo. His blonde brother always was more level-headed, open-minded, and easier to approach. Luffy ditched Ace midway to the Great Terminal one day and went there alone. Even after so many years, he remembered the path to that place so clearly, like he was following it only a day ago. As he was standing on a hill at the edge of the forest and gazed at the Great Terminal, Luffy realized that he certainly didn't miss this place. The stench which filled his lungs and the despair which he could feel emitting from every living person were suffocating. Luffy didn't find Sabo that day. When he sensed Ace entering the Great Terminal, he retreated back to go hunting and do training with Law and Beppo. On the third day, Luffy spotted the familiar mop of curly blonde hair under a large black top hat with a pair of blue goggles wrapped around it, and he couldn't stop the excited grin spreading on his face. Young Sabo's presence felt so different from the Revolutionary Army's second-in-command he'd known so well, it was no wonder that Luffy was unable to recognize him. Not that it mattered. Sabo was his older brother, and nothing would have changed that. Sabo was not having a good day. He found a lone thug with a bag of money and thought he'd be an easy target. What he hadn't expected was a full-blown ambush of the said thug's friends. So, that's why he was standing surrounded by 5 grown-ups, clenching his pipe firmly in his hands, while his brains whirred with a possible escape plan. Before he could come up with anything, the thugs attacked. One moment, Sabo had to fend and avoid all 5 of them. The next moment he was fighting only one man. Wondering what the rest of them were doing, he finished off his opponent and swiveled around. The other 4 were lying sprawled on the ground out cold. A young black-haired kid with a battered straw hat on his head was standing in the middle, glaring at them darkly. When he looked at Sabo, there was a worried frown on his face. "Are you alright? Are you hurt?" the kid asked, eyeing him carefully. "I'm fine," Sabo replied, still stunned by an unexpected and unlikely savior. Thanks, I guess." That into wide, bright grin equaling the sun itself. A split second later the blonde found himself in a bone-crushing hug. He ignored the fact that the kid's arms wrapped around him 2 or 3 times because that did not happen. That was biologically impossible. It was probably just an illusion, created by the adrenaline flowing through his veins from the fight. "Sabu," the straw-hatted boy drawled. "I missed you so much." "You know me?" Sabo asked. "And could you please get off of me?" "Well, duh." The boy rolled his eyes. "Of course, I know you." He clung to him for a bit longer, then finally reluctantly let him go. The blonde narrowed his eyes suspiciously at that goofy smile. "Where have we met?" "We're meeting for the first time, but you had just said." "I'm Monkey D. Luffy, the Pirate King. Nice to meet you," the kid exclaimed, still grinning blissfully. "Huh? Let's be friends. That way you could meet Trafi, Beppo, and Khorasan. And we all could be friends. Wah? We could hunt, and train, and play together, with Ace, too. Can't forget about Ace, she. Just wait, we could build a treehouse. That would be so awesome. And we could fly a joint black flag until we all go out to the sea. Listen, oh." Luffy suddenly perked up. Ace finally reached the gray terminal. "It's time for me to go," he stated and turned to leave, waving. "I'll come to visit you tomorrow. See you soon, Sabo." Sabo just stared dumbfounded at the younger kid's back until he disappeared over the hill of trash. That was the most bizarre encounter he had ever had in his life so far. Ace was so confused. Those new people Garp had brought were really strange, to say the least. First, the adult blonde was the tallest human Ace had ever seen. And the clumsiest. It was a mystery how he had even survived till now and hadn't broken his neck or burned himself to crisp. The way that man looked at him unnerved Ace. It was neither pity nor hate, simply a sadness which was strange because no one usually looked at him like that. Despite that, Ace knew better than to put his trust in a grown-up, because in the end, they were all the same, trying to beat him or whispering nasty things behind his back. Then, there was that creep. His dark narrowed eyes always followed Ace every time he entered the room like he was a rabid dog that could have attacked any moment for no reason. Well, Ace was suspicious of him too. The thing was that his usual threatening manner, aggressive behavior, and murderous glares weren't working on the creep. Ace didn't want to admit, but truthfully the glares he had got in return sent shivers down his spine. For some reason, the image of being dissected always popped into his head, and that was, well, creepy. The bear. In all honesty, the talking bear was freaking Ace out. Not that he would say it out loud or even think about it. He was not aware of the reason why the bear was able to speak, and even if he was curious, there was no way he'd ask those people. Other than that, the bear was the quietest of them all, never getting in Ace's way. The worst, though, was the youngest kid. He boldly refused to leave Ace alone, much to the latter's annoyance. The first week was bearable, apart strange solemn glances and occasional, "let's become friends." The kid mostly kept to himself, and then the chase started. What confused Ace the most, however, was how after another week of the empty chase and a lot of failed attempts to kill him, the straw-hatted kid showed no signs of giving up. Then suddenly he started to follow the older boy only halfway and to disappear soon after. One moment he was behind and another he was already gone. It baffled Ace to no end. Later Sabo told him that he met the kid in the gray terminal and apparently was unable to hide from him. Ace slipped on a wet ground as he landed on a rocky plateau, too deep in his thoughts to see where he was putting his foot. He flailed his arms, trying to find his balance again, and heaved a sigh when he managed to do so. "Ace, hey!" The freckled boy gritted his teeth as the loud shout rang throughout the forest. He quickly hid behind the nearby bush. That moment the straw-hatted kid stumbled into a small clearing and stopped to look around. Suddenly an ear-splitting roar shook the air and a huge tiger stepped in front of Luffy, baring its teeth and staring hungrily at a prey before its eyes. The boy stared back right at it with his hands on his hips, seemingly relaxed, like the huge carnivore was nothing to worry about. "Well, that will teach this idiot," Ace muttered. There was a second roar and a huge bear emerged from the other side, flanking the kid from behind. Luffy glanced at it. Ace clenched his pipe tighter. "Why is he not running away?" he whispered. An unexpected giggle escaped Luffy. She. "This feels familiar," he said, grinning happily. The boy whipped a drool from the corner of his mouth. "Now, which one of you I should eat?" The older boy felt his jaw drop. Had he just heard correctly? Two predators growled at each other, circling the prey they both wanted. Luffy's eyes flickered between them. "I guess a bear won't do with Beppo here. As much as I like its meat," he pouted. Then he glared at the bear. "You, go away." Ace's knees gave out from absolute shock, causing him to sit on the ground as the bear, a huge, aggressive, powerful beast, Lord of the Mount Kalubo, all of a sudden cowered, gawking at the small child with wide eyes full of fear, turned around and fled like it was on fire. "What the heck?" Luffy faced the tiger with a wicked smirk. The beast smashed its huge paw into the ground, trying to squish its prey, but the boy jumped to the side. He stretched his arm backward and brought it back as a punch, straight into the tiger's jaw. The beast stepped back, shook its head and then suddenly wiped at the kid with its paw again. This time, Luffy was not fast enough. The strike flung him at the tree with such force that it broke the trunk in half. "Ace Tsked. That's what you get for—" His voice hitched in his throat, because the kid simply stood up, dusted himself and frowned at the predator. I guess, simple punches are still too weak to bring you down, Luffy observed, before nodding. Alright. He lifted one of his hands and it slowly blackened. Ace blinked. Luffy grinned darkly. He stretched his black arm behind him and snapped it back, punching the tiger into its jaw again. The beast staggered, its eyes rolled back and it collapsed on the ground. Ace blinked one more time. What the heck? Victory, Luffy cheered, fist pumping the air. So, that's where you are. I was looking for you. The straw-hatted boy turned his head to a new person who appeared in the clearing, Trafi. Law stopped next to him. He had his short sword propped on his shoulder like usual these days as he fell into a habit to carry it like that. Kora-san is worried every time you go into this forest alone. He and Daiden sit near the window and sulk until you. The older boy suddenly trailed off and frowned. You're injured, he stated. Luffy glanced over himself. There was a small gash on his left shoulder, with a trail of blood along the hand. It's nothing serious. It needs to be looked at immediately, Law announced, slipping into his doctor mode. Luffy opened his mouth to refuse, but the preteen quickly cut him off even before he could speak. No ifs or buts. The rubber boy pouted again. Okay, I'll just grab my meat and. No grabbing anything with that injury. But, Trafi, my meat. Law rolled his eyes. Alright. I'm gonna warp us both and your meat back home. Just this one time. Deal? Luffy beamed. Deal, he exclaimed before turning towards the direction where Ace was hiding and waving his hand. Bye, Ace. Ace almost smacked himself, of course, the little brat knew he was there. Sabo warned him about it. Some kind of transparent sphere engulfed the area, and the freckled boy rubbed his eyes in disbelief when the other boys and the tiger's body sudden only 2 stones and a rotten tree trunk in their place. No, seriously. What the hell was going on? Ace and Sabo were dashing through the forest like madmen, followed closely by exploding trees and a thundering roar as a huge, pissed-looking tiger chased them, seething with pure rage. If it's not going to kill us, I'm going to kill you, Ace, Sabo screamed, holding his top hat in place and ducking under the arched tree root. Just run, idiot, Ace yelled back, hopping over the same root. The tiger jumped forward and crushed the tree root simply by its own weight. The boys took a sharp turn to the left along an elevated rocky plateau. The beast was not able to make a turn in time and slid straight into the rock, destroying it in the process. It pounced from the rubble a moment later completely unharmed. What made you think that we could defeat this thing? Sabo shouted again. Ace gritted his teeth. Shit. That was not how he imagined the ending of attacking one of the Mount Kalubo beast lords. How that scrawny straw-hatted kid took down such a mountain of raw muscles was beyond his comprehension. With a single punch no less. It must have been a fluke. Shut up and run, he retorted. Suddenly they spotted a person ahead, just standing in the open. He was looking at the different direction and didn't see them approaching. Luffy! Both boys exclaimed together, surprised when they came closer and recognized the person. Sabo added, run. The straw-hatted boy turned around. A huge, sunny grin grew on his face. Ace, Sabo. His eyes widened as the tiger came crashing through the trees right behind its 2 fleeing preys. What happened next was a matter of few seconds. Ace and Sabo passed Luffy, who was seemingly frozen in his spot. Ace tsked and slightly turned his head to yell at the idiot, but then he noticed one of the gigantic Mt. Kalubo trees collapsing right on top of their heads. The freckled boy slid to a halt, grabbing his blonde friend by his sleeve, and they half-jumped, half-rolled backward, barely escaping being squished. A tree crashed down, sending a small earthquake throughout surrounding territory. For a moment both boys just sat on the ground, trying to catch their breath, and dumbly stared at the thick trunk, now blocking their way. I think we crushed someone. What? Ace and Sabo both whipped their heads at the voices and saw a boy with a spotted hat coming towards them, closely followed by a white bear cub. No, they are okay, Law corrected himself, noticing the other two. Ace and Sabo could swear they had heard the disappointment in his tone. No need to apologize, Beppo. Oh, that's good, Beppo replied. While Sabo was observing the talking bear curiously, Ace glared at them. What are you doing here? He demanded. Getting firewood, Law answered without skipping a beat. He motioned at the fallen tree nonchalantly. Fire, wood? Sabo muttered. There was a roar nearby and he tensed. The Lord, he yelled in alarm which was echoed by Ace too. Luffy was high up in the air above the tiger. It was unknown how he got there, but the boy was grinning happily and had both his arms stretched far behind him, gleaming in black. Gomu Gomu no, he said as he snapped his arms straight into the beast's head. Bazooka. His attack slammed the tiger into the ground, creating a small crater on the impact spot and sending another vibration throughout the area. She, Luffy giggled as he landed on his beaten opponent. I got us dinner. Ace's and Sabo's jaws dropped. This whole situation was turning into something out of the reality of this world. Kora-san is preparing an alligator soup for dinner today, Law informed his younger friend. Ooh, it's my favorite, Luffy exclaimed in delight. Beppo's face lit up. Mine too. Yeah, the only thing that he can actually cook, the op user noted, smirking. Who could have known? We can eat this meat for a dessert. Law slightly frowned. You don't eat meat for a dessert. You can eat meat for the main dish and for a dessert, and it'll still not be enough of it, Luffy countered. The preteen snorted. That's not how the rest of us humans are functioning. Beppo piped in shyly. If Kora-san is cooking today and all three of us are here, who's looking after him? Law and Luffy stared at him for a bit, then shared an alarmed glance between each other. Crap, they cursed in unison. Law immediately looked up. I don't see any smoke yet, but I have a limited view from here. We should hurry, Beppo urged. We can pick up firewood later, Luffy decided. But we need to take this thing now. He patted the dead tiger. Someone might take it. Law sighed. He knew better than to argue with the younger raven over the meat. Fine. Let me chop it so it would be easier for us to carry it. He activated his powers, unsheathed his sword and with 2 quick swings chopped the tiger in 3 pieces. He, Luffy, and Beppo grabbed a different piece and turned to leave. Can't wait for Kora-san's soup, Luffy said, a drool forming in the corner of his mouth. There might be no house left to eat it in anymore, Law remarked sarcastically. Suddenly a loud rumble rang from behind, and the group of 3 stopped, turning back. Ace and Sabo were standing at the same spot, too stunned to move. The blonde rubbed the back of his neck awkwardly and flashed a sheepish smile as his stomach growled again. I guess I'm a bit hungry, he confessed. Luffy beamed at him. Wanna join us? You too, Ace, Kora-san's alligator soup is the best. Can we? Sabo asked, shooting an uncertain glance towards Law. The preteen shrugged indifferently. Sure, he smirked. Just a little warning. This little monkey here doesn't have any table manners. You'll have to fight for your food. She, Sabo grinned. No problem, he replied. Let me help carry that, he offered to Luffy, grabbing at the kid's piece of the quarry. Also, thanks for saving us, you're really strong. A D-shaped grin appeared on Luffy's face, thanks. Ace only glared at them all. He felt a sting of betrayal. Sabo befriended those guys so fast. Law didn't move. He was looking in Ace's eye and could see the same lonely darkness which almost consumed him in the past until Kora-san came. A soft smile tugged his lips. No, until Kora-san came and also Luffy stormed into his life, dragging Beppo with him. You coming? The preteen inquired the freckled boy, not fazed by his aggressive glare. TCH, Ace clicked his tongue, then shoved his hands into his pockets and stalked after the others. Luffy slammed the door open with a joyful, we're home. Stop slamming the door, the bandits roared in the chore. Law, Luffy, Beppo, Dayton shouted suddenly appearing in front of them. You should look after your guardian. He had almost burned down the house. We're not babysitters, you know? She. Sorry, Luffy apologized. Yeah, we were careless, Dayton yaw. I apologize. Beppo bowed down. I'm sorry, wait, the bandit boss muttered, blinking at the gang of children crowding the entrance. Law, Luffy, Beppo, Ace, huh? Law, Luffy, Beppo, Ace, huh? Why is there one brat too many of you here? Sabo flashed a charming, wide smile. Hi, I'm Sabo. You must be the Dayton I heard so much about. Sabo? Dayton tilted her head in thought. I heard about you too. Wait, what did you hear about me? I heard that you're a truly manly worthless old bag, Sabo said cheerfully, the charming smile still in place. Truly manly, the curly bandit sputtered. I'm a woman, you know. Corazon decided at that moment pop in from the kitchen. He and the kids set up for their personal use. Boys, you're back, he exclaimed with a happy smile. He wore a pink apron with white hearts, looking ridiculous and endearing at the same time. Dinner is ready. Yay, Luffy bounced towards him. Nay, Corazon, can Sabo and Ace eat with us? Corazon blinked at him, then glanced at the two kids he mentioned. He had never seen the blonde boy before. Although he heard a lot about Ostley, he was surprised about Ace joining them too. Of course, he agreed, eliciting a giggle from the youngest. They all piled up into the room where they usually ate. While Luffy drooled over the soup with Corazon standing guard so that he wouldn't touch it yet, Law and Beppo served the table. Sabo beset them with questions. Why was Corazon so tall? How tall was he? Why did Beppo talk? Where was a home island of minks? How old were Law and Luffy? How come they were so strong? What was a devil fruit? With every answer to his question, the little blonde grew even more curious. Ace stood leaning on the wall next to the door and glowered at their friendly and casual interactions. He didn't want to admit, but he was feeling a bit jealous towards them, so happy and carefree. They probably hadn't a day of hardship in their lives. Especially that annoying straw-hatted brat who grinned like an idiot every time he looked at his direction. They were different from him. When soup finally was served, Ace just glared hatefully at Corazon, who offered him a plate of it and left the room. He went outside and was stomping towards the forest when a shout stopped him. Ace, wait! Luffy came after him with the same plate of soup and extended it to him, with his usual big smile across his face. This is for you. I'm sure you'll like it. You know nothing about me, Ace snapped, knocking the plate out of his hands. It smashed into the ground and fragmented into small pieces, spilling the soup on the grass. Luffy's smile fell, but he said nothing. He just looked at the older Raven, a downright sorrowful expression on his face, eyes full of hurt and sadness. It made Ace uncomfortable. Why was this kid looking at him like that? I know you, Luffy finally said slowly. You probably don't believe me, but I know you. Bullshit. Give me a question. Ace blinked. What? Ask me any question about yourself. Luffy fixed him with a sharp gaze, fierce determination burning in his black eyes. Oh, yeah? The freckled boy narrowed his eyes and crossed his arms in front defenselessly. What would you say if Gold Roger had a son? He asked without really thinking and immediately facepalmed. Stupid. How could he just blurt this out? Luffy smiled. It was a small smile, just a shadow of his usual face-splitting grin. I would say that his dad was awesome, he exclaimed, his smile widening. Roger cared about his nakama and family a lot. He never turned his back to enemies if there was a chance of them going after his crewmates or friends. Everyone who truly knew Roger loved and highly respected him. I know what you heard about him and yourself, but do you really think that one's enemies would tell you the truth about your dad? Ace gawked at him with wide eyes, a surprise, confusion and disbelief written all over his face. That was not what he had expected to hear, like at all. Luffy's smile suddenly took a fond edge and a nostalgic expression settled on his features. I can never be thankful enough for Roger. Thankful? For what? Luffy looked him dead in the eye and deadpanned. For allowing me to meet you? He has a point, you know, Sabo's voice suddenly chimed in. The blonde was standing nearby and also looked into Ace's eyes. About hearing things from your father's enemies. Ace gritted his teeth. That was not what he was used to hearing. Besides, Luffy smirked, you're not the only son of the devil here. Those words took the freckled boy by surprise. What? Luffy's smirk grew into a wide, proud grin. My dad is the revolutionary dragon. Sabo's jaw dropped, but Ace simply frowned in confusion. Revolutionary dragon? That dragon? Sabo asked in absolute disbelief. Yep. Who's that? Ace inquired. Sabo shot him an incredulous glance. You don't know who Revolutionary Dragon is? He's the most wanted person in the world. They say that he's not even a fully human. She. Ace's frown deepened. The most wanted person in the world? Sabo was staring at Luffy. Whoa, I can't believe that you're the son of the dragon. Ace felt frustration welling inside him. There was no way that the little brat was in the same situation as he was, that he was hated by everyone like he was. He had a people who cared about him within an arm's reach. It's still not the same, Ace yelled angrily. He clenched his hands into tight fists, at the brink of lashing out. If the world government would know about your or mine existence, they would put a huge bounty on both of our heads, despite our age, Luffy stated. Such serious words sounded strange coming from the 6-year-old kid. If they would get their hands on you or me, they would hold a public execution for sure, just to show the world that they can purge the lines of bad blood. Not even Grandpa could save us from that. Luffy grinned. But that is why I'm gonna protect you. Ace's pride flared from hearing that proclamation. Protect me? I don't need protection from a weak, spoiled brat like you. Weak, eh? Okay, let's have a fight then. If I win, you'll have to eat with us from now on, the straw-hatted boy challenged, a wicked smirk playing on his lips. Fine, the older one agreed, and if I win, you'll leave me alone forever. Deal? Sabo leaned closer to his friend and hissed, are you insane? Have you forgotten what you've seen so far? This kid had beaten 2 tiger lords with 1 punch and scared a bear lord with only a glare. Ace furrowed his brow as he glowered at the beaming younger boy. That was a fluke. I'm not gonna fall for that, he declared. He's going down. You're an idiot. Shut up, 49-1. That was a result of their 50 fights. Ace scored 1 point because in the middle of the fight Luffy got distracted by a big horned beetle that landed on a tree nearby. While he cheered, Heracles came to watch our fight. Ace punched him in the face. It gave him a win, but also served as a fact that the younger boy wasn't taking him seriously at all. And, damn, that kid could pack a punch. Ace was feeling sore all over his body. His gut was telling him that Luffy actually held back. At least he didn't use his black fists, which seemingly did a lot more damage. This squirt was far stronger than Ace. That made no sense whatsoever. Yay! Ace will be eating with us from now on, Luffy rejoiced, ignoring a death glare from his soon-to-be brother. Sabo, too. The blonde boy simply chuckled. He wasn't going to decline the invitation because frankly, he liked these people. All 4 had seen more of the world than he could have ever imagined, so Sabo was really intrigued in hearing more of their tales. Ace begrudgingly accepted the fact that he'd lost and had to keep his words. So, when Luffy and Sabo started to walk back to the house, he reluctantly followed them, sulking like a dark rain cloud. Sabo was in the shadows, leaning against the tree, waiting for Ace to show up for their usual morning trip to the Grade Terminal. He was getting so bored. In the past month, he got used to eating with Ace and the other 4. Deep down in his heart, Sabo was so happy, he couldn't shake the idea that maybe that's how it felt having a true family. He and Beppo learned that they shared the same hobby, traveling and navigation. They were frequently discussing various topics from the books they'd read, sometimes even during dinner, causing Corazon to scold them both. At first, the little blonde went back to the Grade Terminal for the night, but after some sleepovers and Luffy's annoying nagging, Sabo finally gave up and moved in. Although he was starting to worry about Ace, they still went to the Grade Terminal every morning, but his friend was getting grumpier every day, too prideful to admit that he actually liked those guys as well. Suddenly, the door of the house opened with a bang and giggling Luffy stormed out. He ran off to the opposite direction, towards the sea cliff. Sabo got curious. During these past weeks as he started to live here, he noticed that quite often Luffy, either alone or with the others, went to that place in the Mornagi were doing. Sabo looked around, but Ace was nowhere to be seen. Curiosity getting better of him, he sneakily followed the youngest boy all the way to the cliff. As Luffy stopped at the edge, the blonde hid behind the big boulder nearby. Luffy cupped his mouth with his hands and yelled as loud as possible, Quinto UN. There was nothing happening for a moment, then the sea surface broke and a huge shadow rose from it. Sabo felt dread creeping in as the Sea King towered over the cliff and the small child on it. The sea beast lowered his head, those huge sharp teeth getting closer to Luffy. Adrenaline rushed into his veins, and Sabo leapt out from his hiding spot with an alarmed, Luffy. The boy turned around right at the same time when the Sea King gently nudged him. Sabo's eyes almost jumped out of their sockets. What? He stuttered out, his mind still fixed on the fact that the Sea King nudged the kid. Nudged. Gently and careful. like a normal friend would do, but not a dreadful beast of the sea. "Hey, Sabo," Luffy greeted him cheerfully, absent-mindedly reaching and starting to pet Kinto-un. "I thought you went to the Grey Terminal with Ace." Sabo marveled at the scene. The Sea King let out a content sound akin to a purr as the straw-hatted boy stroked his muzzle. "What? Who?" He couldn't form a coherent question because of the surreal sight before his own eyes. "Your friend?" he asked. She. "Yep," Luffy confirmed. "Sabo, this is Kinto-un, Kinto-un, this is Sabo." The Sea King glanced at the blonde human boy, who showed a small awkward smile to him, and promptly dismissed him, returning to more enjoyable activities. Can I touch him too?" Sabo wondered in a subdued voice. Kinto-un suddenly growled threateningly, narrowing his crimson eyes at the unfamiliar human. Luffy smacked him. Not strong enough to hurt his friend, but enough that he felt it. "Be nice, Sabo is my nakama," he scolded the creature, causing him to let out a whine. Luffy rolled his eyes. "I swear, your attitude is even worse than Ace's. That's why you don't have a lot of friends." The Sea King huffed, nudging the kid again. "Yeah, I'm your friend. Trafi, Beppo, and Khorasan, too. But Sabo also wants to be your friend. Right, Sabo?" Why yes. Yes, of course." Luffy beamed at him. "Come closer. Kinto-un actually likes to cuddle." Sabo laughed nervously. The Sea King liked to cuddle. Who would have thought? He carefully sidled up to Kinto-un and with a trembling hand reached to touch him. His skin was rough and wet, but Sabo felt warmth under his palm. He brushed his hand across the muzzle of the great beast, fascinated. He was actually petting the Sea King. It was definitely the most exciting and bizarre thing that he had done in his life. The next seemingly innocent question from Luffy made Sabo doubt his previous conclusion. "Wanna ride him?" Ace was furious. Sabo was nowhere to be found this morning. Lately, he spent more and more time with those other guys, even started to train with them. Ace had to admit that they were strong, especially the most annoying one, but he believed that he and Sabo could get stronger without their help. The worst thing was that a few times Ace caught himself getting interested in things the others were talking or doing. The thought that he might have started to get attached to these people scared him. That brat already knew who Ace really was, and with that big mouth of his, the kid had probably blabbered it to his friends on the same day. It was strange that there were no spiteful glances or whispers behind his back. Maybe those guys really cared about him despite the fact that his whole existence was a sin. Ace shook his head, getting rid of that line of thoughts. He rounded the house corner and spotted Sabo coming from the forest, excitedly chatting with Luffy. The Raven glowered at them, his temper flaring as he felt betrayed once again. Sabo noticed him and waved his hand. "Oh, Ace, you won't believe what happened. Luffy just introduced me to his friend." "No need to explain, Sabo," Ace interrupted him, cold gaze drilling into the blonde. "I get it now." Sabo's smile fell. Something felt wrong about his friend. He was too tense, his eyes too dark and voice too cold. "Get what?" "That you're not my friend," Ace spat out hatefully. "You were just using me until it was convenient, but the moment you found someone stronger, you abandoned me like everyone else." Sabo's eyes widened. He felt like someone just slapped him and punched him in the gut at the same time. He opened his mouth to say something, but there wasn't a coherent thought in his head. "Ace, that's a really mean thing to tell your friend," Luffy said, his brow furrowing in worry. "He's not my friend," the older Raven snapped, eliciting a sharp gasp from Sabo. "And neither are you. I don't need you, I don't need anyone." Ace gritted his teeth. The naked hurt on the blonde boy's face actually stung. He suddenly felt so bad for saying those words, but he was too prideful to take it back. No, Sabo was the one who betrayed him. "I trusted you, traitor," he hissed to his former friend, turned around and stormed into the forest. Sabo stared after him, feeling weak in his knees. Rubber arms wrapped around him as Luffy hugged him tightly. "Ace didn't mean any of that," the younger boy said quietly, but the blonde stayed silent, too shocked from what had happened. "I'm sorry," Luffy whispered, tightening his embrace. It's not your fault," Sabo finally stammered out, blue eyes still trained on the spot where Ace disappeared. "It might be." Luffy unwinded his arms and stepped away, a thoughtful frown marring his childish features. I'll bring him back. Shit, Ace cursed under his breath as he ran through the forest. What am I doing? He blurted all those nasty words to Sabo in the heat of the moment. He hurt the only person who might have really cared about him. Every time Ace closed his eyes, he saw that last pained expression on the blonde's face. Oh, he hurt him so badly. He really was an idiot like Sabo had insisted. Ace stopped at the edge of the gray terminal, catching his breath. Damn it! He cried out frustrated. The turmoil inside of him only grew more chaotic. Shit. 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 The boy was so confused on what he should do now. A group of men suddenly appeared in front of Ace, and the latter glared at them. Who the heck are you? What do you want? He demanded, just now noticing that he actually was unarmed. Not that it mattered. He was so angry and frustrated, and these men were the perfect target to let it all out. A tall man with short hair on the top of his head that was fashioned in a striped manner, while the rest of it was kept in a loose, with a traditional captain's jacket over a white shirt, smiled an uncanny kind of smile. I'm Blue Jam, the captain of the Blue Jam Pirates. We just landed here and decided to make this island our main base, he informed before his whole demeanor grew cold. So, show us some respect, brat. Luffy was worried. Ace had never been so harsh and obnoxious with his words before. He would have never said that to Sabo. The only thing that had changed was the fact that Luffy befriended Sabo first and probably made Ace feel lonely and left out. His actions caused harm to both of his brothers. Idiot! Luffy cursed himself as he quickened his pace. The boy emerged from the forest and quickly scanned the surroundings. His haki picked up Ace's presence just over the hill with several unfamiliar ones. Luffy hurried towards that direction. He climbed on the hill, his eyes landing on his brother at the moment when a flintlock pistol shot echoed across the area. Luffy's brain short-circuited. He saw the bullet reaching Ace in slow motion and boring itself into his body. He saw his brother falling down while he stood helplessly at the side. He saw Ace's blood slowly seeping into the ground. All of a sudden, Luffy was back in the Marineford, people screaming all around him and the smell of burning flesh. Oh, that horns again in the air. Clinging to his skin like invisible filth he couldn't hope to wash away. Akainu was here again. The squelching sound of his arms sliding from the flesh was deafening in the midst of the raging war. Luffy saw the bastard lifting his hand for another attack. And something inside him snapped. The Red Hair Pirates had a great party going in their favorite bar of Fuchsia Village. While one table was howling a pirate song with their drunken, slurring voices, another still had a drinking contest going while the rest of the crew cheered for the last two participants. Their captain, however, was missing from all the singing and drinking action this time. He stood at a corner, his outstretched arm resting on the wall above Makino's shoulder. The barmaid had her back against the wall and she blushed as the redhead whispered something into her ear. Suddenly a wave of overpowering will rolled through, making even Shanks' hair stand at end. Makino instantly went limp, and the redhead captain swiftly scooped her body into his arms before she hit the floor. Shanks quickly scanned the bar in alarm. His men collapsed one after another, spilling their rum mugs all over the place. The sudden silence was deafening in his ears. "Ben?" Shanks called. "Still awake?" came the answer, and a moment later the first mate strolled into his captain's line of sight with a worried and confused frown on his face. "What happened?" Usopp wondered out loud, checking on his table neighbor and scowling at the foam streaming from his mouth. "Haki," Lucky Roo replied, wiping off the sweat bead from his forehead. Shanks scanned the bar one more time and confirmed that the rest of his crew got knocked out. The magnitude of this conqueror's haki was definitely not common, even on the Grand Line. There was only one person who could have had such power in this part of the world, and he wouldn't have done it without a good reason. Shanks swiftly brushed off the foam from Makino's face with his thumb and gently laid her down on the floor. "Ben, you're with me. Usopp, Lucky Roo, take care of the crew," he ordered with a stern tone, not even waiting for confirmation and already moving towards the doors. Ben fell into step with his captain. Something must have happened to Luffy for him to use haki like that, he muttered, looking around as they exited Party's bar. An eerie silence shrouded the village like a heavy blanket. There were bodies as far as two pirates could see. People collapsed in the middle of streets or on the benches next to their houses. Unconscious birds were still falling from the sky with a dull, thud sound every time they'd hit the ground. Shanks' scowl deepened. The longer he thought about it, the more he came to a conclusion that this was a berserk burst of haki rather than a conscious one. His stomach churned as his mind went through the list of reasons why a boy like Luffy would go into berserk mode. None of them were particularly good, the next always worse than the previous one. The redhead pointed at the Mount Kalubo in the distance. Corazon said that they're now living on that mountain. He said to his first mate, "We should hurry. I have a bad feeling about this." "Aye, Captain," Ben agreed. The two men promptly started to run. They soon found a path leading up the mountain and started following it without any delay. The forest around them was unnaturally quiet, a devastating blast of Conqueror's haki rendering all the wildlife unconscious. A few times, the pirates came upon such animals which only redoubled their uneasiness. Soon enough they reached the clearing with a hut in the middle of it. Without a word, the pirates entered. They both ignored the unfamiliar men, lying all around the first room, and separated to save time on checking the building. Shanks was checking what looked like a kitchen, when he heard Ben calling him, "Captain, found them." He rushed to the room where his first mate was, but before he could even ask, Ben already replied, "Luffy is not here." The black-haired man was squatting next to Law and shaking him gently by his shoulder, trying to wake him up. Shanks looked at unconscious Beppo but decided to leave him be. He walked over slumped form of Corazon and shook him. "Wah, Ben yaw?" Law's sleepy voice rang in a silent house. He shuddered as he felt the chill settling in his whole body. What happened? Corazon also stirred. He groaned and brought a hand to his face. "Where's Luffy?" Shanks put forward a question. Every minute they delayed could have had horrible consequences. Law knitted his brow in a frown. I don't know." He looked around and his eyes widened when they fell on Beppo. "Beppo." "He's fine, Law-kun, don't worry," Ben assured. Luffy's haki simply knocked him out. The boy's attention was now fully on the pirate in front of him. "Luffy's haki? Why would he use it on us?" "Something must have happened, that's why we need to find him," Shanks said, an urge underlying his tone. Corazon sat up unsteadily. "I think I saw him outside with Sabo and Ace earlier," he informed. Shanks was up and out of the room in a mere second. As soon as he exited the hut, the redhead surveyed the surroundings. He walked around the building and spotted a child in blue clothes on the ground. It took a minute for him to arouse from his haki-induced sleep, but the boy's eyes finally fluttered open and he blinked a few times. Shanks felt the kid's body tense up in his arms as those blue orbs focused on him. The blonde instantly wiggled from his hold and went into a defensive stance, although he was still somewhat unsteady on his feet. "Who are you?" the boy demanded. "Relax, Sabo, they are our friends," Law explained as he, Ben, and Corazon approached from behind Shanks. "Oh." The blonde lowered his fists and now stared at the two unfamiliar adults curiously. "Where's Luffy?" the redhead asked. He followed Ace after. Sabo trailed off, hurt flashing through his eyes. "Why? What's going on? Why I was on the ground, unconscious. And why are you all looking for Luffy? Is he in trouble?" The whole situation apparently was catching up with him pretty fast with every inquiry he put forward. Shanks was starting to get impatient. "Do you know where they went?" The blonde boy thought for a moment. "The Great Terminal probably," he replied. "Can you guide us there?" Sabo held out a hand and pointed at some direction. "That way." Shanks sprung forward. The blonde boy let out a short scream in alarm as the man grabbed him as he passed by and tucked him under his arm. Ben once again fell into step with his captain, running right next to him. Corazon with Law in his arms was not far behind them, surprisingly agile for the usually extremely clumsy man. After few more pointers from Sabo, Shanks could finally feel it. He glanced at his first mate, and the latter nodded. He felt it too. Luffy's presence. It felt wrong. Chaotic, furious, despaired. Nothing like a bright ball of sunshine they'd came to associate Luffy with. The group emerged from the forest to the outskirts of the Great Terminal and everyone froze, the sight in front of their eyes causing their minds screeched to a halt. More than 20 bodies of men were lying around, probably knocked out by the burst of Conqueror's haki. But that was not what made Sabo jump from the redhead's arms and to throw up as soon as his feet touched the ground. The men were unharmed, they could see that clearly. But the whole area was covered by blood, which definitely came from one person, because there was only one pair of each limb, scattered far from each other. The rest of the person was unrecognizable mush in the middle of a bloody circle. Blood also covered Luffy, who was kneeling next to the gory remains with Ace's lifeless body in his arms. He pressed Ace to his chest, hugging him tightly, but not too strong. The kid's head was bowed, his forehead gently touching the forehead of the older boy as the tears dripped from Luffy's nose on the pale freckled cheeks. The straw hat was resting peacefully nearby, the only bright and clean thing in the whole gruesome picture. "Luffy!" Law exclaimed. Luffy's head snapped up. Dark eyes glinted dangerously as the boy glared at them, his gaze more of a madman's than that of a sane person's. Law frowned at that, but still bravely stepped forward only to be stopped by Shanks. "RST," he said in a tone which hadn't left any room for disobedience. The preteen simply nodded. He understood that Luffy might have been dangerous in his current state, regardless of his own urge to check him for injuries. The priority, however, was Ace. Something had happened to him to push Luffy over the edge. Law wasn't that attached to the freckled raven, but concern for his life still pricked at his heart hard. Shanks walked carefully towards Luffy, who kept his eyes on him all the time. As the pirate stopped only a step away, the boy tightened his arms around Ace protectively. "Luffy, it's me, Shanks. Can you hear me?" the redhead started softly. Recognition flashed in those dark orbs. Luffy blinked as, though, seeing a man in front of him for the first time. "Shanks?" he asked in a small voice. "That's right, Luffy." Shanks took the last step and squatted down. "Shanks, Ace is, I know, Luffy, but you need to let him go, so that the others could help him," the red-haired captain soothed, slowly prying off the kid's hands from the other boy, noting that the latter's skin wasn't yet deathly cold. Perhaps, they weren't too late. Shanks lifted Luffy up, pulling him into a tight embrace, and the boy in return grabbed his shirt into a death grip. The pirate also picked the straw hat from the ground. Law was next to Ace in a flash, quickly checking him for life signs. Sabo was still retching, unable to suppress shivers shaking his body. It was the first time he saw so much blood and he absent-mindedly wondered how Law wasn't affected by it. The boy flinched when a gentle hand landed on his back. He turned his head and met warm brown reddish eyes of Corazon. "Ace," he whispered, not trusting himself to say more than the name of his best friend. "He's alive." A shout from Law rang sharply, instantly lifting the extreme tightness in the air. The preteen smiled briefly as he felt a heartbeat pulsing under his fingers. Pretty strong at that, considering that Ace had a gunshot wound just an inch from his heart. "Stubborn idiot. We need to bring him back home. I can't do anything out here. Benya, can you help me?" "You heard that?" Shanks asked quietly, but Luffy was still rather unresponsive in his arms. When their eyes met, the pirate nodded to his first mate. The latter had picked up the injured kid and together with the young doctor disappeared into the forest. Then his eyes met Corazon's and he nodded again. The blonde with another boy followed after the first two, leaving them alone. "I killed him," Shanks heard Luffy whisper. "I killed Ace, again." The redhead frowned slightly at his words as he also started walking back, much slower, though. "Luffy, Ace is alive." That gave a desirable effect, because the boy suddenly lifted his head and looked straight into his eyes. "Really?" His voice was so full of hope, but still sounded so broken that Shanks felt his heart ache for this child. "Yeah. Law will take care of him," the pirate assured. "Law? Yeah. I trust Law. He saved me so many times." "So, you see, your friend is in good hands." "Yeah," Luffy said, a tiny smile ghosting his lips. "Thanks, Shanks." Shanks looked at the boy. Despite all his overwhelming power and his old, scarred mind of the Pirate King, Luffy was still a child now. A child with heavier than the world burden on his shoulders. Shanks smirked good-heartedly and ruffled Luffy's hair, ignoring all the grime in it. "Anytime, little anchor." The corridor next to the door, leading into the room where Law and Ben had been taking care of Ace, was packed. Dayton, Dogra, and Magra loitered about at the side of the corridor. They were briefed on what had happened earlier by Shanks and Corazon and now were shooting uncertain glances towards the youngest child from time to time. Still covered in blood and dirt, Luffy refused to leave his spot before he got news about the condition of Ace. He was seating on the floor, leaning against the wall, right in front of the door with his knees to his chest and arms around them. But his eyes were fixed on the door. Sometimes it seemed that the boy hadn't even blinked in all the time he waited there patiently. Beppo was next to him, lost on what to do. His eyes darted from the raven to Sabo at his other side, but the bear didn't know how to comfort his friends, so he resolved to simply keep them company in silence. Shanks leaned on the opposite wall, a small scowl marring his scarred face and his arms crossed tightly over his chest as he clenched the straw hat in one of his hands. Corazon also was seated on the floor. There was a cigarette in his mouth and he blankly observed the white smoke slowly curving up in the air from it. An uneasy calmness which had settled among them was nerve-wracking. It wasn't a surprise that when the door finally opened, everyone leapt to their feet, with the exception of Corazon who slipped and plunked back down. Law halted in the doorway as the 8 pairs of anxious eyes were suddenly staring at him. A small tired smile graced his lips as he announced, "He'll be fine." The relief that washed everyone in the corridor was downright heavenly. The bandits sagged down with a huge sigh. Shanks and Corazon both laughed. Sabo grinned and hugged Beppo, squeezing him tight. "Can I see him?" Luffy asked. Law glanced back at the room and frowned. Ben appeared behind him. "Not right now, the kid needs to rest," he said with a smile. "And you need to bath, Luffy." The boy blinked and looked over himself, a confused expression on his face. "Da ha 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 ha," Shanks laughed. "Come, I'll help you." He put a hand on the small of Luffy's back and gently guided him along the corridor. "We don't want you to drown now, eh, Anchor?" Luffy's eyebrow twitched at the old nickname. "Don't call me that, stupid Osan." "Don't call me Osan, you brat, I'm not that old." Bickering back and forth, the two walked out of sight. Law turned his attention to the rest of the group. "I need someone to go to Goa and collect some medicine supplies. Does anyone have a paper and a pen?" "I can do it. I need to take a breather, anyways," Sabo volunteered. "But, I don't have any money." "I do, so I'll accompany you," said Ben. "What supplies do you need, Law-kun?" The preteen finished scribbling the list on the paper given to him by Dogra and extended it to Ben. "All right." The pirate took the list. "Let's go, Sabo." "Thanks, mister." The boy looked up at the adult in question as they walked in the different direction than Shanks and Luffy. Ben chuckled. "Name's Ben Beckman, the first mate of the Red Hair Pirates." Sabo's eyes almost popped out of their sockets. "You're a pirate?" he exclaimed in awe. "That I am," the man confirmed, grinning. Law glanced back into the room again. "The rest of you will have to help me clean the room before Luffy and Sabo come back." Sabo was absolutely shocked. Ben and he were walking along the street in the Goat Kingdom towards their destination. The whole city was eerily silent. There was no sound of people chattering, no random barking of dogs or mewing of cats, not even chirping of birds. It was completely silent, almost like every living being just up and vanished, leaving behind an empty ghost town. But bodies were sprawled all over the place. Sabo knew that they were alive. He got knocked out like that himself. Although, he pondered how come he woke up so quickly and these people were still out of it even after a couple of hours. "So, all that is Luffy's doing?" Sabo asked in disbelief of the man walking next to him. "Yeah," Ben answered, taking a drag of his cigarette. "The village on the other side of the island is in the same condition." The first mate of the Red Hair Pirates was actually quite surprised to see that the whole Goa Kingdom souped-bed to the little kid's conqueror's hockey. The blast was so much more powerful than he'd imagined at first. Even his captain probably wouldn't be able to knock out so many people at once, Ben mused, and in such an enormous territory. An amused smirk appeared on Hat Kid. "Is extraordinary," he said more to himself than to Sabo, a slight awe underlying his voice. "I'm interested to see what future he'll bring to us." The blonde frowned, but then he noticed a pharmacy they'd been walking to. He smiled and skipped forward, eager to collect medicine for his best friend. "This way, Ben-san." Ace woke up in the late evening. At first, he was extremely confused, staring at the shadowed wooden ceiling above him and unable to remember where he was or even what happened to him. Ace grimaced, willing his brain to recall anything. A memory of the pirate, Blue Jam, grinning at him smugly and leveling a pistol at him slowly slipped back in, and his body tensed, fight-or-flee instinct kicking in. Ace shot into a sitting position and instantly almost blacked out as pain surged throughout his body. Ace! Ace registered several alarmed voices ringing from both his sides. As the pain subsided, he blinked several times, clearing his vision, and looked around. He was in an empty dark room, illuminated only by a couple of oil lamps, casting strange shadows on the walls. Sabo was sitting at his right. Behind him, Ace noticed Corazon slumped in the corner. From the position of the man's head and closed eyes, it was obvious that he was sleeping. "Ace, are you all right?" The question drew his attention to his left side where he met obsidian orbs of that annoying little brat as the latter stared at him, a small frown pulling his eyebrows together. He seemed scared, uncertain, and concerned. For him, Ace realized with a start. "You should drink," Beppo said to Ace, shoving a glass of water for him to take. "Law said that you'll need to drink a lot, because you lost a lot of blood." The freckled boy took the glass and gulped it down, thankful for the water as it did a miracle to his sore and dry throat. "What happened?" He finally spoke for the first time, giving the glass back to the bear. "Where am I?" "Back at Dayton's," Sabo replied. "Ace, you almost died. You," his voice cracked and tears appeared in his bright blue eyes. "You got shot, and if not for Luffy and Law, you'd be dead." Tears now were rolling down his cheeks, and the blonde angrily tried to whip them away. Ace just stared at his friend, his brain drawing a blank, because Sabo was crying. He'd never seen him cry, ever. "What were you thinking, idiot?" It was supposed to be an angry question, but Sabo almost whispered it out, unable to keep his voice from shaking. "I know that you don't see me as your friend anymore, but—" Ace paled, feeling those words like a stab directly into his heart. "I'm sorry," he blurted in a hurry, interrupting his friend. "I'm sorry," he repeated softly once he caught the gaze of Sabo and held it. "I shouldn't have said all that. You're my friend. The best friend. Nothing could change that." There was a sound of a choked sob at his left. Ace turned and glowered at Luffy who was sobbing under his oversized straw hat. "Ah, stop it. I hate crybabies like that," he suddenly yelled as his temper flared. But as soon as his words left his mouth, Ace felt like a complete SBAG. These boys were worried sick for him, even he could see that. Sabo simply laughed, brushing last tears from his eyes. "Yeah, you would hate that." Luffy, though, flinched from his words. He lowered his head so that the shadow from the hat would hide his face fully and sniffled. "Hate me if you want," he said, just loud enough for them to hear, "but please don't die. Please, Ace, I want you to live." Beppo, who was sitting next to the youngest, suddenly pulled him into a hug. Luffy wound his arms around the bear, snuggling closer for the so-needed comfort. Those words felt like a punch to Ace's gut. After all that he put that kid through, Luffy still bore absolutely no ill will towards him. He felt like an even bigger SBAG, although, he couldn't stop the pleased feeling to wash over him from hearing such words. "Well, I'm alive, aren't I?" Ace pointed out softly, the usual heat from his words and eyes gone without a trace. "An inch to the left and you wouldn't be here." Law's voice startled Ace and he glanced at the door to see Preteen standing there with a bunch of blankets in his arms. "What do you mean?" Law closed the door and quickly walked over to him. "This," he said, extending his hand as if giving something. The freckled raven frowned and held his hand out. A small, but rather heavy, slightly deformed lead ball fell into his palm. "What's this?" he asked, narrowing his eyes at the ball. "The bullet from your chest," the Preteen deadpanned, crossing the room and putting one blanket over sleeping form of Corazon. Ace stared at the ball, words, "an inch to the left and you wouldn't be here," echoing in his mind. His other hand unconsciously drifted to his chest. Law noticed that as he passed his bedding. "It will probably leave a scar," he informed dryly, then crouched down beside Beppo and asked quietly, "Luffy fell asleep?" The cub nodded, causing the Preteen smile. "Exhausted himself completely, little idiot," he murmured, covering the younger boy with a blanket. "You should sleep too, Beppo." Ace was still staring at the bullet in his palm. Suddenly another hand landed on it, breaking the line of sight. The boy looked up and blinked at his best friend. "I was asking how are you feeling," Sabo repeated. "I'm fine." "Let me see your wound," Law requested, coming around Ace's bed and dropping a blanket on Sabo's head, eliciting an annoyed, "Oi," from him. Ace's temper flared again, but this time he squished it, keeping his mouth shut as the preteen leaned closer to check on him. "Why is Corazon here?" he inquired instead. Law hummed under his breath, busy with a checkup, and it was Sabo who replied, "Cora-san was also worried." "Why would that man be worried about me?" Sabo shot him an incredulous stare, the question, "Are you really that stupid?" written in his blue eyes. Law chuckled as he finished and leaned away. "Cora-san worries about everybody," he said, glancing briefly at the tall blonde. "His heart is too big for his own good. Are you hungry?" Ace started at such a sudden topic change. "Not really." The preteen nodded and pulled closer a tray with various medicine supplies and a jug of water. He took several different pills, filled the glass with water and offered both to the injured boy. "Take this and go to sleep." Ace grimaced but didn't object. He threw pills into his mouth and washed it down with the water. Then he lay down, feeling bone-deep fatigue gnawing at every inch of his body. Satisfied, Law turned to Sabo. "You, too. You really like to boss us around," the blonde grumbled, narrowing his eyes at the preteen. He hadn't even imagined that the latter had such a mother-hen mode. Law plucked one of the several pillows from Ace's bedding. "I'm the eldest," he deadpanned, throwing the pillow at Sabo. It smacked right into his face, and the preteen smirked in victory. The blonde boy glared at him, opened his mouth to retort something, but Law added, "And a doctor. It was an exhaustive day for everyone, we need to rest." Sabo's mouth clamped up. That was a fair reasoning he couldn't challenge. "Fine." The blonde pushed the pillow on the floor and collapsed on it with the tired, oof, cocooning himself into the blanket. "Hey, Law?" The preteen hummed in reply, draping his own blanket over his shoulders. "Thank you." "For what?" "For saving Ace." Law looked at him and just stared for a bit. Finally, he sighed and muttered, "Just sleep, idiot." Sabo simply grinned at him. Corazon was sulking. Earlier this morning he actually got a smack from Law for trying to lit a cigarette in the room where Ace was sleeping, and then had been scolded for smoking altogether. He was too dazed to object. It melted Corazon's heart that his boy cared so much about him, but he wanted a smoke, damn it. So when Ace opened his eyes that morning, that's how he found the man, still sulking and chewing on a carrot, of all things, as he perused something on the newspaper. "Good morning, D," putting newspaper at the side and flashing one of those crazily wide grins of his. The boy scanned the room. Luffy and Beppo were still sleeping at the same spot as yesterday, yet Sabo and Law were missing. "Where's Sabo?" he asked. "Sabo went to find something for you to eat," the blonde informed. "And I sent Law to sleep. He stayed up all night to make sure you were okay." Ace frowned. He fiddled with the corner of this blanket before finally asking, "Corazon?" "Yeah?" Truthfully, Ace was a bit scared of asking. He never admitted it out loud or showed it in any way, but he thought that Corazon was rather a cool guy for an adult. The Raven didn't trust grown-ups, because even Dayton, his supposed caretaker, called him a demon. He actually really preferred not hear that from this man, but he needed to know. With a sigh, steeling himself for any kind of answer, Ace put forward a question. "What would you say if you met the Gold Roger's son?" Corazon blinked owlishly, completely baffled by such strange and random question. He scratched the back of his head, a bit unnerved by the intensity of the stare he was receiving from the kid. "What I would say if I met, probably, hello." Ace recoiled from surprise. "What, hello?" he echoed in absolute disbelief. "You would say, hello, to the son of Gold Roger?" "Well, isn't that what people say when they meet each other?" Corazon answered, smiling again. Ace simply gawked at him, shocked into silence. He pondered on what was wrong with this man. As much as he wanted to believe that Corazon was mocking or tricking him, he could see only pure honesty on his face. "What would you say to him?" the blonde wondered in return. "That he is a child of the devil who didn't deserve to live and it would have been better if he hadn't been born in the first place," Ace recited without skipping a beat. A deep scowl creased Corazon's face, anger flaring in his eyes. "And why would you say that? You can't tell such things to a person you don't know. He's the son of Gold Roger." So, when Corazon didn't hear any arguments, he sighed. His thoughts veered towards his own parents and brother. "Look, Ace," he started. "Sometimes a very bad person can be born from very gentle and loving parents. And sometimes an extremely good person can be a child born from a devil. He paused. What we do, how we do it and what choices we make, that's what defines us, not our parentage. Ace didn't reply anything. He stared intently at the wall in front of him, as if the answers he was looking for were, somehow, written there. A soft shuffling drew his attention to the left. A disheveled mop of black popped from under the blanket, and Luffy blearily looked around. Ace, he mumbled while lazily rubbing his eye. Good morning, Luffy, Corazon greeted him. Mornin', the boy slurred, still too drowsy. Is Ace okay? Ace's shoulders relaxed in defeat. His wall which he'd built to protect himself cracked and crumbled as Luffy's words from yesterday emerged in his mind. Hate me if you want, but please don't die. Please, Ace, I want you to live. These people were crazy and strange, but Ace suddenly felt safe and needed. Ace swiftly slipped a hand under his pillow and grabbed a bullet Law gave him yesterday. It would work as a reminder for him that his life actually mattered, regardless what the rest of the world had been telling him all this time. Ace, are you okay? Luffy repeated, once his gaze focused on the older Raven. Ace folded his arms in front of his chest. I'm fine, he huffed. Ask me that again and I'm gonna punch you. The grin he received from the kid was so impossibly bright that it made the sun appear bleak and dim. Ace was a patient person and was able to sit calmly in one place if he wanted to, or when a creepy teen doctor said so. It was the evening of the second day after Ace had been shot. He was feeling just fine, but Law ordered not to overstrain, said it was his honor as a doctor to keep the patient from hurting himself and threatened to hide his head if he wouldn't listen. Both Ace and Sabo laughed at that. They were so naive. Law immediately suggested showing them a demonstration. Luffy, of course, volunteered. To put it mildly, the boys certainly hadn't appreciated the sight of evilly smirking Law with maniacally laughing Luffy's head in his hand while his headless body was running around and bumping into trees. So, Ace was patient and listened to his doctor's orders while the others went into the forest to collect firewood and hunt. Corazon was left behind to look after him. Earlier that day, Sabo told Ace everything what had happened, what Luffy did after he had been shot, and about 2 pirates who helped them. He was shocked, to say the least, once he learned that Luffy knocked the whole island unconscious. Soon after that, Shanks visited their place to see how the brats were doing. To celebrate Ace's ongoing recovery, they had decided to have a night out and camp outside. That's what they were doing now. Once the boys were back with enough firewood to last them a whole winter and maybe enough meat to feed Luffy and the rest of them, no time was wasted to start a feast. They didn't even wait for Shanks. As everything had already been eaten and the bonfire was dancing merrily, the boys settled in their beddings for story time. Luffy was seated in the middle, Ace at his right and Law at his left with Sabo and Beppo at their other sides respectively. Corazon was right in front of them across the bonfire. I hope we're not intruding, a female voice suddenly spoke from the darkness of the forest, and shortly after Makino and Shanks entered the lighted area. Sorry for being late. Shanks grinned. It's all Makino's fault. The woman smacked him playfully for that remark, causing him to grin even wider. Makino, Shanks, Luffy exclaimed, greeting them with a toothy grin. You made it. The barmaid returned the smile. Hello, boys, Corazon. She put a wicker basket in front of the kids. I heard that one of Luffy's friends got hurt, so I baked some sweets. Luffy sucked in a drool already acculating at the corner of his mouth. Makino's sweets are the best, he cheered. It smells delicious. Sabo agreed. The kids leaned forward, eagerly peeking inside as Ace uncovered the content. There was a lot of ooh and ah for the next minute as they all marveled at the different shapes and icing of the cookies. The moment they were ready to dig in, a stern, boys, stopped them. 5 pairs of confused eyes looked up to stare at their blonde guardian. What do you need to say first? The adults could literally see question marks appear above the kids' heads. Time to eat? Luffy tried, cocking his head to the side. Shanks burst into laughter, and Makino giggled beside him. No, Luffy, she said. You need to say, thank you. Oh. The straw-hatted boy paused. Ooh, he drawled as understanding finally dawned on him. He grinned from ear to ear. Thanks, Makino. Slightly embarrassed, Law mumbled, thank you, Makino ya. Beppo bowed his head. Thank you, and sorry. Sabo sheepishly rubbed the back of his neck with a smile on his face. Thank you. Thanks, Ace muttered, not even looking at the woman. And then for the next half an hour there was only sounds of munching, and crunching, and slapping Luffy's rubbery appendages away. When all cookies had been eaten, Luffy giggled all of a sudden. "Nay, Shanks," he said with his usual sunny grin. "Tell us a story about Gold Roger." The pleased expression on Ace's features instantly transformed into a grimace. He started to stand up, but rubbery arms suddenly wrapped around his middle and yanked him down. "No," Luffy said before the older boy could even open his mouth to shout at him. "You'll sit and listen how awesome your dad is." Shanks' eyes widened at Luffy's words for a moment, and then he smiled fondly at the raven. They all heard of the search arranged by the world government, of so many babies killed or vanishing without a trace. It was a real miracle to end alive and well. Corazon choked on the smoke of his cigarette the moment those words sunk into his mind. Now it was clear why Ace asked that question in the morning, though. Recalling the boy's own answer to the same question broke the man's heart. "I don't want to," Ace yelled and bonked Luffy on his head. "And don't shout who my father is so loud, dumbass." "Why not? I don't see you screaming who your own father is. Now, get off of me." Luffy blinked at him. She, he snickered quietly and then loudly announced, "My dad is the revolutionary dragon." Corazon choked again. This time on the sake he decided to drink to ease the slight discomfort in his throat from the previous news, while Shanks simply bellowed with laughter. "Who's dragon?" Beppo whispered to Law. Law thought for a moment. "I think I heard him being called the most wanted person in the world," he replied. The bear's black-rimmed lips formed "oh" as he glanced at his youngest friend. "Ace, I was a cabin boy on Roger's ship," Shanks told him, and the boy stilled, looking at him with a mix of surprise, curiosity, and hate. "Rouge, right? Your mother's name." "You knew my mother?" "Yeah," Shanks answered. "She was a very kind and loving woman. The story behind how we met her is not known to many. Want to hear it?" Ace was curious about his mother, but agreeing meant that he would need to hear how his father met her and he didn't want to hear anything about him. But this pirate might be his only chance to hear anything about her from a person who actually knew her. Ace felt his head spin from trying to decide on what to say. He was saved from it when Shanks started his story without waiting for his assent. "We were sailing across the Grand Line, trying to reach the next island when a sudden storm caught us by surprise. While storms on the Grand Line are usually fierce and sudden, this one was definitely on the different level. Roger and Rayleigh, the first mate of Roger Pirates, decided that." Ace simply relaxed in his sitting position, listening intently, with Luffy still wrapped around him. The straw-hatted boy let out a silent giggle and Ace absent-mindedly hit him over his head again, shushing him. The story went for a couple of hours. No one even noticed how Shanks from Rouge jumped to telling them about the adventures they had. At some point, Makino ended up nestling up against the pirate, her head on his shoulder while his arm rested on her back. Luffy was the first one to fall asleep. He was still hugging Ace, but his arms had shrunk into their normal length sometime during the story. Beppo was the second, soon followed by Law, who used him as his pillow. Sabo was nodding repeatedly from drowsiness, trying to stay awake, but finally soup-bed to the sleep, slumping on Ace's shoulder. Ace was still awake and alert. He was so engrossed in listening to the story that he hadn't even noticed others dozing off. He stared wide-eyed at Shanks because Roger just now managed to beat his opponent and free his crew. "And then?" he asked, eagerness shining in his whole presence. Shanks smiled. "I was hurt but tried to put a brave face. Captain saw through my lies, simply scooped me up and carried me to the ship princess style. It was so embarrassing, but after all that we had the biggest party ever." Ace grinned. At that moment, Sabo slid from his shoulder and fell into his bedding with a loud snore. The freckled raven looked at one side, then at another. When did they all fall asleep? The adults burst into laughter, causing the boy glower at them. "You should go to sleep too, Ace," Corazon urged softly. Now that he thought about it, Ace felt tired. He rubbed his eyes and yawned. "Yeah, sleep sounds good right about now," he agreed, entangling Luffy off himself and laying down. Makino was smiling at the kids. "They are so cute," she whispered as Ace's breath evened out, indicating him also falling asleep. "Da ha 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 ha. Those little monsters?" Shanks asked teasingly and received an elbow to his side. Shush. Corazon shushed him. Calm. He snapped his fingers over the sleeping boys, enveloping them in an invisible soundproof bubble. But really, Corazon, I praise your bravery for deciding to become a father to these kids, the pirate said, opening his sake bottle he just now had a chance to start drinking. The blonde blushed, suddenly embarrassed. I didn't become their father, I'm just looking after them. Yeah, and it's called becoming a parent, Shanks argued. I think you'll be a great father to them, Makino added. Corazon's blush intensified. His gaze darted to the boys and he sighed. No, I don't think the kids would ever think of me like that. If you ever need help, Corazon, you know where to find me, Makino offered. Thank you, Makino. Well, I also don't envy you. With 2 Ds among them, the redhead drawled amused. You'll have your hands full. 3, actually. Huh? 3 Ds among them, Corazon specified with a sigh. Law is also one of them. Oh, Shanks glanced at the eldest and laughed again. As I said, don't envy you. The blonde's eyebrows furrowed slightly, they're good kids. I don't doubt that, but do you know the saying about the D? D will surely bring a storm upon the world. With 3 Ds at one place, especially with Luffy among them. He motioned at the youngest who, at this point, managed to snuggle back up to Ace's side. They'll stir the biggest storm ever seen in this world, for better or for worse. Be ready for that, Papa Corazon. Shanks finished with a teasing smirk and mischievous sparks twinkling in his eyes. Corazon's tattooed face instantly flushed bright pink again. I think you'd make a good father, too, Shanks, Makino said, tilting her head slightly and peering straight into the pirate's eyes with a small smile. Oh, really? Shanks replied, looking at her. Well, my dear lady, you'd make a wonderful mother yourself. The barmaid's smile grew wider and she leaned forward to catch the man's lips with her own. Corazon awkwardly turned his gaze from the couple and chose better to watch the sleeping kids. Luffy had shifted in his position and now was lying on his stomach with both arms draped over the other boys almost protectively. With everything those kids had gone through, Corazon didn't have any illusions on being called a father by them. It was enough for him to be their friend and simply look after them when needed. They were pretty self-dependent, after all. Corazon chuckled thinking that it was rather funny how he, the former top executive of Don Quixote Pirates, known for his hatred for children, ended up raising a whole 5 of them. Life was full of irony. Shanks and Usopp traversed through the forest in a hurry. It had been a few days after the captain of the Red Hair Pirates spent the night with the kids, Corazon, and Makino at the bonfire. He had planned to do some business for a week or longer up north of the East Blue, but due to some unexpected circumstances they turned around and came back to Dawn Island. Shanks needed to find Luffy as soon as possible. 2 pirates entered the small clearing and stopped, their gazes falling on 3 of the 5 kids. Sabo and Beppo were sitting on the ground, blindfolded, while Ace whacked them with a wooden stick. Shanks smiled in amusement. Hockey training, huh? Ace looked up at the direction of a sudden voice. Sabo lifted a blindfold from one of his eyes and peeked at the men. Shanks-san, what are you doing here so soon? I'm looking for Luffy. Eh? Again? A loud creak drew everyone's attention to the other side of the clearing. One of the Mount Kalubo trees suddenly toppled over and tumbled down, scattering a flock of birds and shaking the earth. A familiar merry laughter rang from the forest and soon 2 boys appeared in the clearing. Almost got it, Trafi, Luffy cheered, putting his hands behind his head nonchalantly. Law's mouth twitched into a smirk. Yeah, thanks to you. She. The straw-hatted boy noticed the pirates and drew into a frown as though sensing something bad, and his arms fell back at his sides. Shanks? Luffy, I bring news. What kind of news? Your little outburst caught the world government's attention, Shanks told him, his tone serious. They are sending a team to investigate the reason behind the incident. Luffy's eyes widened as the realization settled in. How bad? He inquired in a hushed voice. We spotted a ship half a day from here with a cipher pulls sails, Usopp informed, speaking for the first time. The youngest bit his lower lip. Crap, he muttered. Which number is coming? CP7. Luffy visibly relaxed. At least it's not 0 or 9, he exhaled with a sigh. It's probably the nearest cipher pulls team they had, the redhead mused loudly. The other boys could only stare at the exchange as they had no idea what the pirates were talking with their friend. "What's a cipher pole?" Sabo asked. "It's an intelligence agency, working directly under the employ of the world government," Shanks explained. "They are bad news," Luffy mumbled, already berating himself for losing control like that. He stared at Ace, making him shift on his feet uncomfortably. "If they find us, they might find out who Ace and I are." His gaze jumped on the eldest boy. "Not to mention, that we can't let them see Khorasan or Trafi," he said, and Law frowned, understanding the implication of those words. "You should all leave the island for a while," Shanks suggested. "If need be, I'll take responsibility for what happened here." Luffy was startled by his words and he whipped his head instantly to stare at his friend with frightened and concerned eyes. Shanks only grinned at him. "I meant it when I said that the red hair pirates will be your ally, our chibi pirate king." He reached to ruffle the boy's hair, the latter's straw hat hanging on a rope around his neck. "And allies always help each other in trouble." Luffy beamed at him. "Thanks, Shanks, you're the best." "Dahahahaha, of course, I am. You should decide where you'll go quickly," Usopp urged. "You have less than an hour to leave before they'll be too close for you to go unnoticed." "Oh, I know where we'll go. It's not too far from here, but far enough that they wouldn't come investigating." The straw-hatted boy smirked. "The Syrup Village." The sniper blinked a few times before squeezing out a surprised, "Eh? Dahahahaha." The redhead burst into laughter again, clapping his crewmate over his shoulder. "Aren't you a lucky bastard? All right, Luffy. We'll come as soon as those government's dogs leave." Luffy grinned wide and bright. "I bet Usopp will be thrilled to see his dad."